Thank you so much for joining us. This is 10 out of 10. I'm Mark Schumacher. This, of course, the podcast that aspires to give you 10 takeaways in just 10 minutes with key leaders in and around the home furnishing industry and retail as a whole. Before we start today, I want to thank my sponsors. Synchrony is a sponsor of this podcast, also Fortiva Retail Credit, American First Finance, and Versatile Credit. Now, together, this group creates a unified platform that, thanks to Versatile's technology, it connects Synchrony for those prime promotional offers, Fortiva for second look financing, and then payment options from American First, because guess what? We know that you want to get a quick yes in store and online for your customers. So that's why they have come together to sponsor this humble little program. My guest today, I'm excited about this today, is Max Axler. He's the Chief Credit Officer for Synchrony. And Max, first and foremost, I just want to thank you for joining us. It's great to have someone at your level that we can really kind of teeth into here for some great insights. So thank you first and foremost for joining us. And I am going to start the clock and run right 10 minutes. I think the first thing that I'd like to hit you with is that, consumers have and continue to go through a lot right now. I mean, consumer confidence is all over the place. There's so many things going on in our world, et cetera. Can you talk about what is the current consumer behavior patterns that you've seen that you think are interesting, in this current environment that we're in?
Well, Mark, thank you for asking me to join you. I'm really excited to be here today. Big question. We only have 10 minutes, right? We could spend a lot of time here, and I'll attempt to be as concise as I can be. I'll really make 2 points, and we'll see where it carries us. The first is consumers want to be in control of their financing options, and there's really two components to this. They want choice. Some customers gravitate towards promos, revolving, some lean towards installment loans. At Synchrony, we found offering multi-product qualification to be a really good way to give customers that choice. And then the second piece of that has really been around how I have been so impressed with the thoughtfulness of consumers over the pandemic period. It started early with the stimulus, the excess savings, the deleveraging, but they generally know what they can afford, and they seek options to make their specific math work. For instance, inside Synchrony and inside our home furnishing world, we've seen promos extend about 5 months over the last couple of years as they've tried to manage their monthly cash flows. And that's a great example of a consumer knowing what they can afford and really purchasing things that kind of fit that window. I'd say this.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the second point is really the uniqueness of this industry, which is you need to marry in-store presence with online digital experience. And this is different than many other industries we lend in, particularly ones with small tickets where it's easy to return goods. Consumers want to get pre-qualified online, but they want to go into a store and they want to feel furniture. They want to see it, they want to sit in it, they want to touch it. And that means they purchase maybe in-store, maybe it means they purchase online. And so it's very interesting to see that dynamic play through. Consumers evaluate, whether purchasing in store or back online, is there arbitrage between that? Is there differences in delivery fees or other things that are captured in that? And so unlike other industries, we see actually differences in pre-qualification moving to application because there are so many people that want to see it, see what their line is online, and then actually make the purchase in store.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that because you're right. I mean, home furnishings, we know that it's a digital first transaction. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's 85% or higher are starting out there first. One of the things I found interesting in some of the subject matter that we talked about prior to this podcast today is that you mentioned that consumers are seeking affordability. Not only affordability, but clarity. Define clarity. So what is it that the customer wants from that standpoint? I just want to understand what you're talking about.
Well, they want to understand not just what the payment is, how long it is. They want to understand the other features. So for instance, in our products, again, and we offer a range of products from short and long-term installment to revolving credit. There's differences obviously between those two large product sets, between installment and revolving credit. And what we see a lot in store is someone says, "Oh, I'm gonna buy a couch and an ottoman," and then they go in, they think about making that purchase, and they get the line, and they say, "Oh, I actually am going to buy a chair along with it. And so they add on, and you can do that in a revolving world because we're qualifying you for a larger line in many instances than just an installment loan. Installment loans generally are saying, "Hey, this is the exact thing I'm going to buy." And so, what we see by offering revolving is that a lot of times there's an upsell that happens, and consumers purchase more.
Interesting thing that I also wanted to pause switch that you said that I thought was very interesting. So you feel through your data, et cetera, that the customer right now has a different attitude about debt, maybe not so quick to jump into debt. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that certainly will influence decision making. I mean, big time.
Yeah, I think again, consumers have been incredibly thoughtful, which I'm appreciative of. Obviously, lending money, the goal is to get it back. But I do think when they think about taking on debt, and again, we see it through the data, we see it across different, I would say, age groups. People feel differently about debt. That is not atypical. Over the course of time, as you think about financial maturation, people go from generally not wanting to incur debt to understanding you need to start building a credit history to step into larger type of loans when you start building out families. So credit cards is an easy way to start that financial journey. You don't start with a mortgage. Someone gives you a mortgage after you've proven that you have a long history of making payments responsibly. And so you start with credit card, it steps into auto or student, and then eventually maybe a mortgage for some. And so putting people on that journey is really important. That being said, there are some differences that we are seeing across different generations. I think there was clearly an aversion that for groups that had parents go through the GFC, right, in 08 and 09. I think the younger generation we are currently seeing has a little bit more, uh, is gravitating a little bit more to installment loans than I would say credit cards or other types of products. Slightly, not meaningfully, slightly. And so we're obviously paying attention to that. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to give customers choice.
We talk about the connection between some industries, and we know that Synchrony, one of your divisions, is home and auto because there's
Yeah.
some real synergies there. What are you seeing currently in the auto industry, which generally is a little bit ahead of home furnishings and some other sectors? What are we seeing there right now that we need to be aware of going forward?
Yeah, and a lot of our auto lending is really around the maintenance of vehicles. So we're not stepping into auto loans. So we're not doing lending on new and used vehicles. We are really focused on the maintenance piece of autos. What we see there is that cars, obviously, very interesting time through the pandemic period where there was obviously supply chain issues, and then there was a bunch of steel that was put out, people stepping into it. Prices had seen really significant inflation. So we're seeing a lot of people hang on to their vehicles for longer periods of time. And so more maintenance is required, obviously tires, et cetera, and repairs. That is different than what the auto industry is seeing. If you're reading the news today, you're seeing a lot of news about auto delinquency. That is auto loans, so that is new and used vehicles. There is an increase in auto delinquency versus, I would say pre-pandemic, and particularly sequentially over the last couple of years, we've seen some pressure in auto loans across the financial service industry. But that is a little bit different than what we're seeing on the maintenance of vehicles.
Okay, that's I mean that's helpful, but these trends do parallel a lot with the buying practices in home furnishings. We've got a couple more minutes here. Let me just ask you
Yeah.
this too. When we talk about some of the broader challenges here, I find it interesting that you talk a lot about long-term financial wellness for the customer. I'm just going to be honest here and say that I think most people look at finance companies and think, no, they don't care about my wellness. They just want me to make my payments. Why is that an important aspect of this? Do you feel for Synchrony and others? Why is that an important piece? Is this part of really making sure that the customer feels like there is somewhat of a partnership there and not just a one-sided relationship?
Yeah, I think a couple things. It is core to our values. We're obviously a lending business, we're a for-profit, but we want to help people. And Synchrony is disproportionately consumers' first credit card. And so we are a business to business to consumer lender. We are primarily not a direct consumer lender. What that means is we are offering credit through our 300,000 plus merchants. We're not targeting Mark and putting in Mark's email or physical mailbox something that says, hey, apply directly to Synchrony. And so we see the breadth of Americans apply for credit. And so we have to engage not just with the super high credit scores, but across the entire breadth of Americans. It is also incredibly important to our partners, who many of these people are incredibly loyal to these retailers, these providers, these merchants, and we want to start them on that financial journey. And we have a very unique product set between short and long-term installment, something we call private label, and something called dual card, kind of a co-brand product that allows us to step in and have much higher approval rates, partly because we're leveraging our data, partly because of our product set, partly because the affinity that the consumers have towards those brands. And so it allows us to say yes more often than
And
the
you
other
want
ones.
return customers like everybody else does.
100%.
Max, first of all, believe it or not, that's our 10 minutes. But you
Well,
just touched on something interesting when you talked about data, which I know is something that Synchrony and all the large financial companies are trying to harness. And there's some interesting aspects of that that I would love to dig in since I've got you pinned to your desk there. So we will have a 10 more where we're going to talk a little bit more and do a deeper dive on some of the data, not just in how you're using it, but how all of us consumers can understand it more and maybe utilize it as well. So, Max Axler, Chief Credit Officer for Synchrony, thank you for joining us here on 10 out of 10. I'm Mark Schumacher, and we will see you next time.
thanks, Mark.